Part 1. The command room buzzed with the usual pre-mission energy as officers shuffled through tactical maps and radio chatter filled the air. Captain Marcus Rivera had been having one of those days where everything seemed to go wrong from the moment he stepped onto the base. His coffee had gone cold, his morning briefing had run over by 30 minutes, and now he was dealing with what he perceived as insubordination from someone he didn't recognize. The woman standing across from him wore standard military fatigues, her dark hair pulled back in a regulation bun. She couldn't have been more than 5'6", with a lean build that made her look almost fragile next to the hulking communications equipment. Her name tape read Chen, but Marcus had never seen her before in his 15 years of service at Naval Base Coronado. "I'm telling you, Captain, the communication frequencies you're planning to use are compromised," Lieutenant Saracen said firmly, her voice steady despite the growing tension in the room. "I intercepted enemy chatter on those exact channels during my last deployment. If you use them for tomorrow's operation, you're putting the entire team at risk." Marcus felt his jaw clench. He'd been planning this mission for weeks, coordinating with multiple agencies and reviewing every detail with his senior staff. Now this unknown lieutenant was questioning his judgment in front of half a dozen other officers. The room had gone quiet, with everyone pretending to focus on their work while clearly listening to every word. "Lieutenant, I don't know who you think you are or where you've been deployed, but I've been running operations in this theater for longer than you've probably been in the Navy," Marcus shot back, his voice rising. "These frequencies have been cleared by intelligence, verified by communications, and approved by command. I don't need some desk jockey telling me how to run my mission." Sarah's expression remained calm, though something flickered in her dark eyes. "Sir, with respect, I'm not a desk jockey. I'm trying to prevent American soldiers from walking into an ambush. The intelligence you're relying on is 3 weeks old. The enemy adapted after we hit their supply lines in Kandahar. They're monitoring those channels now." The mention of Kandahar caught Marcus off guard for a split second. That operation had been classified, known only to a select few. But his frustration overrode his curiosity. He'd been questioned, contradicted, and challenged enough for one day. The stress of command, the pressure from his superiors, and his own stubborn pride created a perfect storm of poor judgment. "Listen here, Lieutenant," Marcus said, stepping closer to Sarah. His voice dropped to a dangerous whisper that somehow seemed more menacing than shouting. "I don't care what you think you know about Kandahar or anywhere else. You're out of line, and you need to learn your place." Sarah stood her ground, though Marcus noticed her stance subtly shift. Her feet positioned themselves slightly wider, her weight distributed evenly. To most observers, it would have looked like a natural adjustment. Marcus was too angry to notice the tactical positioning. "Captain, I understand you're under pressure, but the lives of 18 soldiers depend on getting this right," Sarah continued, her tone remaining respectful but unwavering. "If you'll just look at the intelligence report I prepared, you'll see the pattern in their radio traffic. They know we're coming." That was the final straw. Marcus felt something snap inside him. In his mind, this lieutenant had embarrassed him, questioned his competence, and refused to back down even when he'd made his position clear. Without thinking, without considering the consequences or even fully registering what he was about to do, Marcus raised his hand and struck Sarah across the face. The sound of the slap echoed through the command room like a gunshot. Every conversation stopped. Every keystroke paused. Even the radio chatter seemed to fade into the background as 20 pairs of eyes turned toward the two figures standing near the tactical display. Sarah's head had turned with the impact, a red mark already forming on her left cheek. For a moment, she remained perfectly still, her hand slowly rising to touch the spot where Marcus had hit her. When she turned back to face him, her expression was completely controlled, almost eerily calm. Marcus immediately realized he'd made a terrible mistake. The anger that had clouded his judgment began to clear, replaced by a growing sense of dread. He'd just struck a subordinate officer in front of witnesses. His career was effectively over. But something about Sarah's reaction made his stomach drop even further. Most people would have been shocked, angry, or hurt. Sarah looked calculating. "Captain Rivera," she said quietly, her voice carrying easily through the silent room. I'm going to pretend that didn't happen and give you one more chance to look at this intelligence. Because in about 30 seconds, someone's going to walk through that door who's going to want to know why you just assaulted a member of his team. Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. His team? Before Sarah could answer, the command room door burst open with enough force to rattle the frame. A man in his 50s strode in, wearing the insignia of a Navy commander. Commander Jack Stevens had the kind of presence that commanded immediate attention, tall, broad-shouldered, with steel-gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. Behind him followed two other men, both with the bearing of special operations personnel. "Chen, what's your assessment of the communication protocols?" Commander Stevens asked without preamble, then stopped mid-stride as he took in the scene. His gaze moved from Sarah's reddened cheek to Marcus's pale face, and his expression darkened considerably. "Sir," Sarah replied crisply, coming to attention. "I've identified compromised frequencies in tomorrow's mission parameters. Captain Rivera and I were discussing alternatives." Marcus watched this exchange with growing horror. The way Commander Stevens addressed Sarah, the way she responded, the casual familiarity mixed with military precision, it painted a picture he desperately didn't want to believe. "Were you now?" Stevens said slowly, his voice carrying a dangerous edge. His eyes fixed on Marcus like a predator studying prey. "Captain, would you care to explain why one of my operators appears to have been struck in the face during this discussion?" The word operators hit Marcus like a physical blow. Not soldier, not sailor, not even special forces. Operators. There was only one unit at Coronado that Stevens could be referring to, and Marcus felt his world beginning to collapse around him. "Commander, I can explain," Marcus began, but Stevens cut him off with a gesture. "Lieutenant Chen, report," Stevens ordered. Sarah's response was crisp and professional. "Sir, Captain Rivera disagreed with my assessment of enemy communication intercepts. When I pressed the issue due to the safety implications for tomorrow's mission, he became agitated. The captain struck me once across the face. No significant injury sustained. I recommend we focus on the mission parameters rather than this incident." Marcus was amazed by her restraint. She could have destroyed him with her report, could have detailed every word of his dismissive comments and his loss of control. Instead, she'd given him the most charitable possible version of events while still being truthful. Commander Stevens, however, was not inclined toward charity. "Captain Rivera, are you aware of Lieutenant Chen's background and qualifications?" "No, sir," Marcus managed to croak out. "Lieutenant Sarah Chen graduated first in her class from the Naval Academy, completed SEAL training with the highest scores in her class history, and has completed 4 tours in Afghanistan and Iraq. She's fluent in 6 languages, holds advanced degrees in linguistics and strategic intelligence, and has been decorated for valor 3 times, including a Silver Star for actions in Kandahar that saved the lives of an entire Afghan village." Each word felt like another nail in Marcus's coffin. He looked at Sarah with new eyes, seeing details he'd missed before. The way she carried herself, the quiet confidence, the tactical positioning when he'd approached her. All the signs had been there, and he'd been too blinded by his own arrogance to see them. "Furthermore," Stevens continued, "Lieutenant Chen volunteered to work with your unit despite being overqualified for the assignment because she specifically requested to help prevent the kind of intelligence failures that have cost American lives in recent operations. She's been reviewing your mission parameters as a favor to me and to help ensure your people come home safely." Marcus felt sick. Everything Sarah had told him was not only true but represented expertise far beyond his own. The woman he'd dismissed as a desk jockey was a decorated war hero who'd volunteered to help him succeed. "Sir, I had no idea," Marcus began. "No, you didn't," Stevens cut him off coldly. "But that's not an excuse for your behavior. Even if Lieutenant Chen had been a fresh recruit straight out of boot camp, your actions would have been inexcusable. The fact that you struck a decorated SEAL who was trying to save your mission and your men's lives makes it infinitely worse." The room remained dead silent. Marcus could feel the stares of his subordinates, could imagine the stories that would spread throughout the base within hours. His reputation, his career, everything he'd worked for over 15 years was crumbling because of one moment of uncontrolled anger. Captain, you will report to my office in 1 hour for a formal interview regarding this incident, Stevens continued. Until then, you are relieved of command of tomorrow's operation. Lieutenant Chen, you'll brief Captain Morrison on the communication security issues you've identified. Understood, sir, Sarah replied, already moving toward the tactical maps. As Stevens and his men left the command room, Marcus found himself alone with his shame and the weight of knowing he'd just destroyed his career. But worse than that was the knowledge that his pride and prejudice had nearly cost soldiers their lives. The woman he'd struck had been trying to save them, and he'd responded with violence. Sarah worked quietly at the communications console, apparently unaffected by what had just happened. She methodically went through frequency charts and intelligence reports, building a case that would undoubtedly prove her warnings correct. Marcus wanted to apologize, to somehow make amends, but the words stuck in his throat. The mission she'd been trying to protect was scheduled for dawn. 18 soldiers would be counting on intelligence assessments and communication protocols that Marcus now realized were compromised. If Sarah was right, and he had no reason to doubt her expertise, his stubborn refusal to listen could have led to an ambush. As he prepared to leave the command room and face whatever consequences awaited him, Marcus caught Sarah's eye. She looked up from her work for just a moment, and he saw not anger or satisfaction, but something almost like pity. It was somehow worse than if she'd been furious with him. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "for what it's worth, I'm sorry." Sarah nodded slightly. "Focus on learning from this, Captain. That's how we honor the people we serve with." Then, she returned to her work, leaving Marcus to contemplate how completely he'd misjudged the situation and how his moment of violence had revealed not her weakness, but his own. Part 2. The formal investigation began exactly 72 hours after the incident in the command room. Marcus had spent those 3 days in a strange limbo, officially suspended from duties while the Navy's Internal Affairs Division gathered witness statements and reviewed security footage. He'd barely slept, barely eaten, and found himself replaying that moment over and over again, wishing desperately that he could take it back. The mission that Sarah had tried to warn him about had proceeded under Captain Morrison's command, using the modified communication protocols she'd recommended. Intelligence reports confirmed that enemy forces had indeed been monitoring the original frequencies Marcus had planned to use. Sarah's intervention had prevented what would have been a devastating ambush. All 18 soldiers had returned safely, and the mission had exceeded its objectives. Marcus learned all of this secondhand, through hushed conversations in the base corridors and official reports he wasn't supposed to see. His colleagues treated him with a mixture of pity and disgust. Some of the younger officers avoided eye contact entirely, while the senior staff maintained professional courtesy that felt colder than outright hostility. The investigation hearing took place in a sterile conference room in the administrative building. Marcus sat at a metal table facing a panel of 3 officers, Captain Elizabeth Warren from JAG, Commander Robert Hayes from Naval Personnel Command, and Commander Stevens, whose presence felt like a constant reminder of Marcus's failure. Lieutenant Chen sat to the side, wearing dress blues with her ribbon rack prominently displayed. Marcus had researched her background after the incident, and seeing her decorations in person made his shame even more acute. The Silver Star, Purple Heart, Navy Cross, Combat Action Ribbon, each medal represented courage and sacrifice that Marcus could barely comprehend. The woman he'd struck in anger had risked her life repeatedly in service to her country. "Captain Rivera," Captain Warren began, opening a thick folder of documents. "You're here to address allegations of conduct unbecoming an officer and assault on a fellow service member. Do you understand the charges?" "Yes, ma'am," Marcus replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "Before we proceed with formal testimony, is there anything you'd like to say regarding the events of November 15th? Marcus had prepared a statement, had consulted with his assigned counsel, had planned to present a defense based on stress and miscommunication. But, sitting across from Sarah, seeing the professional composure with which she carried herself despite what he'd done to her, all his prepared words crumbled away. "I have no defense for my actions," he said simply. "Lieutenant Chen was performing her duties admirably, trying to prevent casualties in an upcoming operation. I responded to her professional expertise with personal violence. There's no excuse for what I did." The panel exchanged glances. His counsel, a young JAG officer named Lieutenant Brooks, looked surprised by his client's abandonment of their prepared strategy. "Very well," Captain Warren said. "Lieutenant Chen, please provide your account of the events." Sarah's testimony was precise and factual, delivered without emotion or embellishment. She described Marcus's dismissal of her intelligence assessment, his escalating anger, and the moment he struck her. She also noted her own failure to properly introduce herself and establish her credentials at the beginning of their interaction. "Lieutenant," Commander Hayes interjected, "are you suggesting you bear some responsibility for Captain Rivera's actions?" "No, sir," Sarah replied firmly. "Captain Rivera is solely responsible for his decision to use violence. However, I recognize that my approach could have been more diplomatic. I should have established my background and credentials more clearly from the outset." Marcus felt another wave of shame. Even while testifying about his assault on her, Sarah was trying to find ways to minimize the damage to his career. The panel called several witnesses from the command room, each corroborating Sarah's account. Sergeant Mills, a communications technician, described the tension in the room and Marcus's increasingly aggressive tone. Lieutenant Rodriguez testified about the shocked silence that followed the assault and Sarah's remarkably professional response. Then came testimony that Marcus hadn't expected. Captain Morrison, who had taken over the mission after Marcus's suspension, provided a detailed account of how Sarah's intelligence had saved the operation. Lieutenant Chen's warning about compromised frequencies was absolutely correct, Morrison testified. "When we implemented her recommended protocols, we intercepted enemy communications confirming they were monitoring our original channels. Without her intervention, we would have walked into a carefully prepared ambush." Commander Stevens was the final witness. His testimony was devastating in its restraint. "Lieutenant Chen is one of the finest officers I've had the privilege to command," Stevens said. She requested assignment to this base specifically to share her intelligence expertise with conventional forces. She's passionate about preventing the kind of communication security failures that have cost lives in recent operations. Her knowledge of enemy tactics in the Afghanistan theater is unparalleled. "And her character?" Captain Warren asked. "Unimpeachable. Lieutenant Chen has consistently demonstrated courage under fire, loyalty to her team, and integrity in all her actions. She's refused commendations on multiple occasions, preferring that credit go to the teams she's served with. The fact that she's shown such restraint and professionalism following Captain Rivera's assault speaks to her exceptional character." The hearing recessed for deliberation. Marcus found himself alone in the corridor with Sarah for the first time since the incident. She stood by a window overlooking the training grounds where new recruits practiced basic drills. "Lieutenant," Marcus began, struggling for words. "I know I said it before, but I need you to know how deeply sorry I am. Not just for hitting you, but for everything. For dismissing you, for not listening, for letting my ego nearly cost those soldiers their lives." Sarah turned from the window, studying his face with those calm, intelligent eyes that had unnerved him from their first meeting. "Captain, may I ask you something?" "Of course. What do you think would have happened if I had been a fresh recruit instead of an experienced SEAL?" The question caught Marcus off guard. I don't understand. If I had been a young ensign, just out of the academy, with the same intelligence concerns but without the credentials to back them up, what would you have done?" Marcus felt his throat constrict as he understood her point. "I would have dismissed you. Probably more harshly. And if that ensign had pressed the issue, trying to save lives despite your dismissal? I might have." Marcus couldn't finish the sentence, but they both knew the answer. "The problem isn't that you hit a Navy SEAL, Captain. The problem is that you hit a junior officer who was trying to do her job. My qualifications don't make your actions worse, they just make them more visible." Sarah's words cut deeper than any formal reprimand could have. She was right, and Marcus knew it. His behavior pattern revealed a deeper character flaw, a willingness to use rank and intimidation to silence those who challenged him. "You're right," Marcus admitted. "I've been that officer before. Not physically, but I've shut down subordinates who questioned me. I convinced myself it was about maintaining authority and discipline. And, now? Marcus was quiet for a long moment, watching the recruits on the training ground struggle through obstacle courses. Many of them would face real combat someday. They deserved leaders who would listen to good intelligence regardless of its source. Now I understand that real authority comes from competence and character, not rank and intimidation, he said finally. Those soldiers almost died because I couldn't handle being wrong. Sarah nodded slightly. That's a start. When the hearing resumed, the panel's decision was swift and decisive. Marcus was found guilty of conduct unbecoming an officer and assault. He was sentenced to reduction in rank to lieutenant commander, forfeiture of 2 months' pay, and immediate transfer from his command position. Additionally, he was ordered to complete anger management counseling and attend a leadership remediation program. It was, Marcus knew, a remarkably lenient sentence. He could have faced court-martial and dismissal from service. The panel had clearly been influenced by his acceptance of responsibility and Sarah's testimony about his previous competence as an officer. As the hearing concluded, Captain Warren addressed both officers. Lieutenant Chen, your professionalism throughout this process has been exemplary. Your restraint and focus on mission success over personal grievance reflects the highest traditions of naval service. Captain Rivera, she continued, your acceptance of responsibility suggests you understand the gravity of your actions. Use this opportunity to become the leader your subordinates deserve. The Navy is investing in your rehabilitation because we believe people can change and grow. Don't waste that investment. Outside the administrative building, Marcus found Sarah waiting by his car. The base was quiet in the late afternoon, most personnel having finished their duties for the day. Lieutenant, I don't expect forgiveness, but I want you to know that I'm going to work every day to become worthy of the second chance they've given me, Marcus said. Sarah was quiet for a moment, then reached into her pocket and pulled out a small card. This is the contact information for Master Chief Ramirez, she said, handing him the card. He runs leadership development programs for officers who've had difficulties. He helped me when I was struggling with anger issues after my second deployment. Marcus looked at the card in surprise. You had anger issues? I came back from Afghanistan wanting to hurt everyone who hadn't been there, who didn't understand what we'd seen and done. I got into fights, pushed away friends, nearly destroyed my career before it really started. Sarah's voice was matter-of-fact, but Marcus could hear the pain underneath. Master Chief taught me that strength isn't about dominating others. It's about controlling yourself and lifting up those around you. Why are you helping me? Sarah looked out across the base, where lights were beginning to flicker on in the evening twilight. Because someone helped me when I needed it. And, because those 18 soldiers came home safely, which means the mission worked. Sometimes that's what matters most, not perfect people, but people willing to learn from their mistakes and do better. She started to walk toward her car, then paused. Captain. Lieutenant Commander Rivera, she corrected herself. The anger management counseling they ordered? Don't just go through the motions. Do the work. The people under your command deserve a leader who's confronted his demons. As Sarah drove away, Marcus stood holding Master Chief Ramirez's card, feeling something he hadn't experienced in days, hope. The road ahead would be difficult, filled with professional humiliation and personal growth that would challenge everything he thought he knew about leadership and himself. But, for the first time since that horrible moment in the command room, he believed he might emerge from this crisis as a better man and a better officer. The base around him buzzed with its usual evening activity, young sailors heading to dinner, officers reviewing tomorrow's training schedules, maintenance crews preparing equipment for the next day's operations. All of it represented the vast machinery of military service that Marcus had been part of for 15 years. He'd nearly thrown it all away in a moment of uncontrolled anger, but Sarah's unexpected grace had given him a chance to earn his place back in that machinery. As he walked to his car, Marcus made a silent promise to the woman who had shown him mercy he didn't deserve. He would do the work, confront his flaws, and become the kind of leader who listened to good advice regardless of its source. It was the only way to honor the second chance he'd been given. Part 3. 8 months later, Lieutenant Commander Marcus Rivera stood in the same command room where his career had nearly ended, but everything about him was different. The anger management counseling had been just the beginning. Sessions with Master Chief Ramirez had forced him to confront not just his temper, but the deeper insecurities and pride that had driven his need to dominate others. The leadership remediation program had rebuilt his understanding of military command from the ground up. He'd spent 6 months at a joint training facility in Virginia, working with officers from all branches who were rebuilding their careers after various failures. Some had made financial mistakes, others had failed critical missions, and a few, like Marcus, had crossed lines of personal conduct. The program was demanding, combining intensive psychological counseling with practical leadership exercises that challenged every assumption about command authority. The most humbling part had been the reverse mentorship program, where junior officers fresh from leadership schools taught remediation students about modern command techniques. Marcus had learned more from a 23-year-old Marine lieutenant about collaborative decision-making than he'd absorbed in his previous 15 years of service. Now he was back at Coronado, assigned as Deputy Operations Coordinator under his former subordinate, Captain Morrison. It was a significant demotion in real terms, but Marcus had learned to measure success differently. His new role involved coordinating between special operations teams and conventional forces, the kind of inter-unit cooperation he'd previously dismissed as bureaucratic nonsense. The morning briefing was about to begin when Lieutenant Chen entered the command room. Marcus hadn't seen her since the hearing 8 months ago, and he was struck by how she carried herself with the same quiet confidence he remembered. She wore the uniform of a lieutenant commander now, having been promoted during his absence. "Commander Chen," he said, offering a respectful nod as she approached the briefing table. "Lieutenant Commander Rivera," she replied with professional courtesy. "Welcome back to Coronado." The briefing concerned a complex hostage rescue operation in Somalia. A merchant vessel had been seized by pirates, with 15 crew members being held in a coastal compound. The mission required precise coordination between Navy SEALs, conventional Marine units, and Air Force support. Captain Morrison led the briefing, outlining the operational parameters while various specialists provided input on their areas of expertise. Marcus noticed immediately how different the dynamic was from his previous command style. Morrison asked questions, solicited opinions, and genuinely listened to responses from officers regardless of their rank. "Commander Chen, what's your assessment of the communication security for this operation?" Morrison asked. Sarah moved to the tactical display, her presentation crisp and comprehensive. "The pirates have been monitoring maritime frequencies, but their capability is limited to basic commercial channels. I recommend using encrypted military networks with frequency hopping protocols. However, we need to consider that the hostages may be moved if they detect unusual radio activity in the area." "Alternatives?" Morrison prompted. "We could use ultra-low-frequency submarine communications for initial positioning, then switch to directional microwave links once the assault teams are in position. It would minimize detectable signals while maintaining command coordination." Marcus watched this exchange with fascination. 8 months ago, he would have seen Sarah's detailed recommendations as a challenge to his authority. Now he recognized them for what they were, the expertise of a professional trying to ensure mission success and save lives. "Lieutenant Commander Rivera, you've coordinated similar joint operations in Virginia. What's your assessment of the timing requirements?" Morrison asked. Marcus felt a flutter of nervousness. This was his first substantive contribution since returning, and he was acutely aware that many of the officers in the room remembered his previous failure. But his months of remediation had taught him to focus on the mission rather than his own ego. "Based on the tidal charts and patrol patterns, we have a 4-hour window starting at 0200 local time," Marcus said, pointing to the relevant data on his tablet. However, Commander Chen's point about communication detection is critical. If we compress the timeline to minimize radio exposure, we could reduce the window to 90 minutes. That's tight, but it prioritizes operational security. Morrison nodded approvingly. "Good analysis. Commander Chen, can your communication protocols support that compressed timeline?" "Absolutely, sir. In fact, the shorter duration would actually enhance security by reducing the time window for potential detection. As the briefing continued, Marcus found himself genuinely collaborating with Sarah and the other officers. There was no tension, no underlying power struggle, just professionals working together to solve complex problems. It was the kind of teamwork he'd read about in leadership manuals but never truly understood until now. After the formal briefing ended, Morrison asked Marcus to stay behind for a private conversation. "How are you feeling about being back?" Morrison asked once they were alone. "Grateful for the opportunity, sir. And, honestly, impressed by how well the unit has functioned in my absence." Morrison smiled slightly. "Marcus, I'm going to be direct with you. When you left, morale in this command was terrible. People were afraid to speak up, afraid to offer suggestions that might contradict your decisions. The change since then has been dramatic." "I understand, sir. I'm not here to reclaim my old position. I'm here to contribute in whatever capacity serves the mission best." "I believe you mean that. But I want you to understand something else. Commander Chen specifically requested that you be assigned to this unit when you returned." Marcus felt his eyebrows rise in surprise. "She requested it?" "She told me that your technical competence was never in question, and that your experience would be valuable if paired with better leadership skills. She also said that officers who'd done the hard work of changing themselves often became the best mentors for others facing similar challenges." The conversation left Marcus feeling both humbled and motivated. Over the following weeks, he threw himself into his new role with an energy and focus he'd never experienced before. Working closely with Sarah and other special operations personnel, he began to understand the intricate coordination required for modern military operations. His relationship with Sarah evolved slowly from formal courtesy to genuine professional respect. She never mentioned their previous encounter, never made him feel like he was on probation or being judged for his past behavior. Instead, she treated him as a competent colleague whose input was valued. The breakthrough moment came during the Somalia hostage rescue operation 6 weeks later. Marcus was monitoring communications from the command center while Sarah coordinated with the assault teams on the ground. 20 minutes into the operation, enemy radio chatter indicated that the pirates had detected unusual activity and were preparing to move the hostages. "Commander Chen, we've got a problem," Marcus reported, highlighting the intercepted communications on his screen. "They're mobilizing vehicles to relocate the hostages." Sarah studied the intelligence for exactly 3 seconds before making her decision. "All teams, this is Control. Execute Contingency Plan Bravo immediately. Window is closing fast." She turned to Marcus. "Can you patch me directly to the Air Force coordinator? We need close air support to interdict those vehicles before they reach the secondary compound." Marcus's fingers flew across his console, establishing the communication link within seconds. "You're connected. Channel 7, encrypted." For the next 47 minutes, Marcus and Sarah worked in perfect synchronization, coordinating between ground teams, air support, and naval units as the operation evolved in real time. When communication equipment failed on one of the assault teams, Marcus jury-rigged a backup system using commercial satellite phones. When Sarah needed real-time translation of Somali dialects, Marcus connected her to a linguist at the Pentagon. The operation succeeded completely. All 15 hostages were rescued without injury, and the pirate leadership was captured for international prosecution. In his after-action report, the ground team commander specifically commended the coordination between Marcus and Sarah, noting that their seamless teamwork had been critical to the mission's success. That evening, Marcus found Sarah on the base recreation pier, watching the sunset over San Diego Bay. The California coast stretched out before them, painted gold and orange by the setting sun. "Commander, do you have a minute?" Marcus asked. "Of course. And it's Sarah when we're off duty." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching fishing boats return to harbor in the distance. "I want to thank you," Marcus said finally. "Not just for requesting my assignment here, but for treating me like a professional instead of a liability." Sarah turned to look at him, her expression thoughtful. "You did the work, Marcus. The anger management, the leadership training, the honest self-assessment. That's not easy for anyone, especially someone with your background and experience. Still, you didn't have to give me a chance to prove I'd changed. Do you remember what I said about someone helping me when I needed it? Marcus nodded. Master Chief Ramirez was the one who helped me deal with my anger after Afghanistan. But, before him, there was a captain named Jennifer Walsh who saw potential in me when I was just another angry young sailor looking for fights. She could have written me off, transferred me to a dead-end assignment, or recommended me for discharge. Instead, she invested time and effort in helping me become better. Sarah paused, watching a pelican dive for fish near the pier. Captain Walsh was killed in Iraq 6 months after she helped save my career. I never got the chance to repay her directly. But, I learned that you honor people like that by doing for others what they did for you. Marcus felt a lump in his throat. She sounds like an extraordinary officer. She was. And, she taught me that leadership isn't about being perfect. It's about being honest about your flaws, working constantly to overcome them, and helping others do the same. They watched the last fishing boat disappear into the harbor as the sun touched the horizon. The operation today, Marcus said. Working with you, feeling like a real part of the team again, it reminded me why I joined the Navy in the first place. And, what was that? To be part of something bigger than myself. To serve alongside people who challenge me to be better. Marcus paused, choosing his words carefully. I spent so many years thinking leadership was about proving I was the smartest person in the room. Now I understand it's about making sure the room is full of people smarter than me and, then, listening to what they have to say. Sarah smiled, the first genuinely warm expression he'd seen from her since his return. That's exactly what Captain Walsh would have said. As they walked back toward the base, Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. 8 months ago, his career had been destroyed by pride, anger, and the inability to listen to wisdom from an unexpected source. Tonight, he was part of a team that had saved 15 lives, working in partnership with the woman he'd once assaulted in his ignorance. The road back had been longer and more difficult than he'd ever imagined. Confronting his flaws, rebuilding his understanding of leadership, and earning back the trust of his colleagues had required a level of humility that had sometimes felt impossible. But, Sarah's example of grace under pressure, Master Chief Ramirez's tough love mentoring, and his own determination to become worthy of a second chance had transformed not just his career, but his character. Walking across the base where he'd once commanded through intimidation and now served through competence, Marcus understood that his real leadership journey was just beginning. The anger and insecurity that had driven his need to dominate others were replaced by a quiet confidence rooted in genuine expertise and respect for those around him. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to prove that people could change and grow. But, tonight, Marcus Rivera was simply grateful to be a small part of the vast machinery of service that protected others, working alongside professionals who had taught him that true strength came not from striking others down, but from lifting them up.